There's a couple exciting Nintendo Switch stories we have to talk about today, starting with some brand new NPD sales data and the Nintendo Switch's performance well into its 5th full year on the market, and a discussion around the future of this platform as a whole. Then the big talking point for today's video is a big update from a story that essentially went viral last week around the claims that Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 may indeed be too big for the original Nintendo Switch, and we have to dive back into this story, talk about an update directly from the source, and also have that conversation on whether or not Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 will indeed be a cross-generational game. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. Now, as I mentioned, guys, we got a couple major Nintendo Switch stories to get through today, and we have to kick it off with some brand new NPD sales data, which, if you are unfamiliar, they essentially track all physical hardware and software sales here in the US region specifically, and we now have March's closed out Nintendo Switch numbers, and surprise, Nintendo Switch is still leading the pack in total unit sales as it officially crosses its 5th full year available on retail shelves. And we can see the details on this article posted up over at Nintendo Everything, where it says March 2022 NPD. Switch sells the most hardware units in the US. According to the latest NPD report, Switch was the best-selling hardware platform in the United States for March 2022 in terms of unit sales. However, Xbox Series led the way in terms of dollar sales. The Xbox Series X, costing significantly more at $500, partially plays a role in that. With March concluding the first quarter of 2022, we also get further insight there as well. As it turns out, things are exactly the same. During Q1 as a whole, Switch led the way in the US when it comes to unit sales, but Xbox Series came out on top for dollar sales. Now, from that same NPD March sales data, I want to quickly highlight the top 10 best-selling Nintendo Switch games, with at the top, starting out at number 1, Kirby and the Forgotten Land. Number 2 is Pokemon Legends Arceus. Number 3 is Mario Kart 8, because of course it is. Number 4 is Triangle Strategy. Number 5 is Mario Party Superstars. Number 6, Smash Bros. Ultimate. Number 7, Animal Crossing New Horizons. 8, Super Mario 3D World. 9, Rune Factory 5. And 10, New Super Mario Bros. And of course, this does exclude digital sales. So anytime you talk about console hardware sales data in the year of 2022, you have to also provide the asterisk to the conversation, which is the fact that essentially right now, whoever can provide the most hardware on retail shelves and actually source the chips in this chip shortage environment that we are in right now is essentially going to come out on top, as Microsoft and Sony are clearly both playing catch up with their supply chain, as you really cannot walk into a store to this day and easily find a Series X or a PS5 on retail store shelves. It does appear like the Series S is getting back in stock more often, which of course is a digital only console and actually competes directly against the Switch in terms of price point at a $300 retail price. And we are starting to see a lot of Steam pickup when it comes to Xbox's sales here in 2022, with really Game Pass and that lower entry level price point probably being the two big factors, not to mention all of the acquisitions that they are currently working on. But I definitely think it's notable that month in and month out that Nintendo still continues to sell the most total units out of all three big consoles, even considering that we are talking about a Switch that originally launched back in March of 2017, and to this day it is month in and month out, with the exception of 1 or 2 months over the course of time since it originally launched, that it's been dethroned from the best unit sales. I definitely think that is impressive momentum to Nintendo. That is also why we will probably see a longer life cycle for something like the Nintendo Switch than a typical Nintendo console, as I clearly think that Nintendo does not want to cut themselves short on the lifetime sales of the Nintendo Switch, and something like a more powerful successor definitely could still fall into the current family of systems, as opposed to a hard break to a brand new experience from the ground up, which is what I think Nintendo will ultimately deliver when they do reveal whatever their true next gen successor is. But we could be talking about an ongoing family of systems with something like a chipset that runs both the current games and then also allows you to have things that fans want, like smoother frame rates at 60 FPS, and maybe even that long rumored and awaited DLSS technology from Nvidia built in, allowing things like docked 4K performance. Then, besides the Nintendo Switch console sales part of that conversation, you also have to keep in mind the kind of successful launch that Kirby and the Forgotten Land saw, as that game came out on March 25th, and for the entire month of March, it saw the best total unit sales performance in Nintendo Switch games. So I'm sure that HAL Laboratory and friends are very excited with that particular title and its performance so far, and I'll be curious to see if it continues to sell in the upcoming months as time goes on. And I definitely hope most Switch fans out there give it a chance, as in my opinion, line, it is the best Kirby game by far and away that we have seen in years and years. But I want to hear from you guys in the comments down below your personal thoughts and theories and speculation around where Nintendo is at in its life cycle, whether or not you think we see these unit sales continue to dominate month in and month out now that we're in the officially the 5th year of the Nintendo Switch's life cycle, or if you think that we will start to see a big dwindling down effect, and if Nintendo will react with something like a brand new Switch successor, which we will also be talking about in a second. And share with me your overall thoughts of Kirby and the Forgotten Land popping up to the #1 spot with really just less than 1 week to sell in the month of March, and what you think of Kirby and the Forgotten Land quality wise overall, and if you're having fun with it, and what you hope we see from the series going forward. So make sure you share all your thoughts and opinions on all things March 2022 NPD sales results in the comments down below. Now, the other story we're talking about today is a big update to one that essentially went viral last week, which is the conversation around Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 potentially being too big for something like the current Nintendo Switch, or too graphically demanding, and that what the footage that we've seen of this game so far may indeed be running on more powerful Switch Pro or Switch 2 hardware that Nintendo has not officially revealed. But you had this spawn from Digital Foundry's podcast originally, where they were breaking down some of the cloud effects and some of the lighting details and noticeably higher resolution from the trailer than what you would typically expect for a Nintendo Switch game. And of course, news headlines did what news headlines do, and essentially the discussion from their podcast blew up all over the internet, and you now had a lot of Nintendo fans calling into question whether or not Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 would just straight up launch new Switch hardware and maybe potentially even not be sold on the base model Switch, to entice many of the base model Switch owners to be forced to upgrade essentially to play this game to the new Switch. And while I myself did not think that that would be the scenario, there is still a possibility this launches as a cross-generational game, or something like it runs better and on a better resolution and frame rate on something like a Switch Pro. But my belief is always that it will be sold to the 100+ million install base on the current Switch that we see. Well, there is now a big update directly from Digital Foundry themselves, which, whoever you are not familiar, they do a ton of breakdowns on frame rates of games after they are released. They essentially dissect the performance, and so they clearly have a lot of knowledge in this area, but they really do clear up what was said directly from them and how it's not implying that this game can't run on the Switch. So to get the exact details and the update around the story, let's quickly hop over to Nintendo Life, where they have a nice article transcribed with a breakdown of the story overall and Digital Foundry's updated comments. Digital Foundry reiterates that no, Breath of the Wild 2 is not too big for Switch. No need to save the rupees for a successor yet. Those good old Switch Pro rumors have been back and forth since The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild's 2 delay a few weeks ago. And with new footage that dropped alongside of the news of the delay, so too did discussions around how good it looked. In their weekly discussion, the team over at Digital Foundry brought up those lovely visuals recently. It looks like Breath of the Wild 2 was running extra smooth, perhaps too smooth. The DF chaps went on to discuss suspicions that Breath of the Wild 2 could potentially be a cross-generation game that straddles both current hardware and a Switch successor, much like Breath of the Wild did with the previous generation. After some very enthusiastic reportage from some corners of the internet, this week they reiterated that no, that doesn't mean Breath of the Wild 2 is not coming to Switch. In last week's video, Digital Foundry's question was, is this actually running on the Switch? With discussions revolving around clouds, anti-aliasing, and comparisons from the Xbox Series X and S differences. On this week's episode, the team led by redoubtable Richard Ledbetter reiterated that no, Breath of the Wild 2 isn't too big for Switch. John Linneman added that the group was basically discussing how the trailer appeared to be rendered at a higher resolution, and that's it. Check out their new discussion below. Seeing game trailers rendered in higher than gameplay definition isn't uncommon, even if Nintendo rarely bump up the resolution of their trailers. So it's not too surprising to see Link explore these beautifully rendered worlds, apparently unencumbered by the Switch's sometimes precarious performance. The DF team's discussion was educated speculation. Nintendo could just as well be using new techniques to help their clouds look that bit fluffier. Now, in addition to reading that article, I did go watch the portion of the podcast from Digital Foundry directly where they address this, and it's very clear that yes, they were having fun with some speculation around the fact that the trailer looked incredible, it seemed to be running at a higher resolution, and there was some impressive techniques done. They make it very clear that they are not stating that it cannot run on base model Switch hardware, and they specifically say the opposite, that Breath of the Wild 2 has already been confirmed for the Nintendo Switch, and it will be launching on the Nintendo Switch. there is still a big question mark that they have in their heads, which I also have in mind, and I'm sure many other people do, that is this the window when Nintendo would indeed launch a more powerful version of the current Switch, or do a true next-gen iteration, but sell it alongside Breath of the Wild 2, which then Breath of the Wild 2 essentially is the same strategy as what Breath of the Wild 1 was when it launched on both the Wii U and the Switch simultaneously. And to that point of the argument, I can definitely see Nintendo positioning themselves to do something like that. I am less in the mindset of thinking that it is a hard generational break with something like a true up Switch 2. I am more in the mindset of that we could actually be seeing something like a new Nintendo Switch, a Super Nintendo Switch, a Switch Pro, but still be in that classical lineup of family of systems sold alongside of the Switch Lite, the base model Switch, the OLED, and now we have the Switch 4K or whatever the new thing is called. And at the end of the day, most of the games will be developed across the board for both. Maybe certain outliers will only be able to run on the newer, more powerful hardware, but essentially it's just that performance bump that I think a lot of us were hoping the OLED would have offered, where it is the same games and base textures we know and love, but you can just see enhanced performance and a higher resolution upscaled with the DLSS technology from NVIDIA. And that's the possibility that I could personally see Nintendo doing with the launch of Zelda Breath of the Wild 2, especially now the fact that it's been delayed into 2023. Was that correlated and a decision to launch brand new hardware? That remains to be seen. I think that's also less likely, but if Nintendo did line it up where, hey, we need more development time for Breath of the Wild 2 anyway, we know we're around the corner from launching a little bit more powerful hardware in the current family of Switch systems, let's position these together. Yes, I can definitely see them doing that, and this at that point in spring of 2023, it will have officially been 6 years from the launch of the original Nintendo Switch, and I don't think that that's too soon for Nintendo to put out some kind of a pro model or more powerful hardware to be sold along Breath of the Wild 2. That said, Breath of the Wild 2 is absolutely still coming to the base model Nintendo Switch, and it could be cross-generational in the sense that it helps launch new hardware but still runs on the current. So that's where I fall in this particular issue. I am glad that Digital Foundry went out there and from their own words updated this story and kind of what they meant behind this, as clearly it kind of got out of control last week online. So at this point in the video, guys, I want to hear from you personally on both the stories we talked about today, both with the Switch's continued performance in the NPD sales charts, Kirby and the Forgotten Land leading the pack in March with a very short time window to sell, and then also the big talking point around Zelda Breath of the Wild 2 and whether or not you think footage that we've seen in the game so far could be running on something like a Switch Pro, if you think it's for sure coming to the Switch, or do you actually think that this will be a hard break for cross-gen support and this game will only be sold on something like a more powerful Switch hardware, or you kind of like me and you fall in the middle thinking that this could indeed launch new Switch hardware, but it's most likely part of the current family of systems and it will be sold alongside of it day and date, but still run on both consoles at the end of the day. So regardless of your thoughts and opinions on everything we talked about today in the video, I do want to hear from you guys before you leave, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Make sure you check out the weekend video if you haven't already, where we walk down memory lane together, boot up Sonic 3, and have a large discussion of what made 2D Sonic era games so great, and a discussion of what we hope to see from Sonic games going forward. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.